So nitric oxide, so my understanding is, and please correct me, that the nasal nitric oxide only lasts for a few seconds in the lungs, but it's enough to open up the vessels and the tissue so that we get that more efficient breath, which we don't get through the mouth. So we take that breath in and everything opens up and we can bring in that extra oxygen. But then there's a different version of the nitric oxide that is going around the body, that you're saying that when our oxygen levels start to drop, it releases. Is that right? Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so there's endothelial nitric oxide, which gets released kind of throughout all of your blood vessels. And that is, so it's all nitric oxide, right? But it's like the way it's stored and things like that. And so when you breathe it through your nose, the general consensus has been for a long time that that the lifetime is too short, so it reacts too quickly. So it only has a few seconds, right? So once it gets into your lungs, it reacts too quickly to actually be taken up into the blood and actually help with downstream effects. So when we look at studies that show, for example, people inhale extra nitric oxide, they'll see systemic effects. So like they inhale extra nitric oxide, but then they'll see improvements in their leg or something like that. And they've never really understood why. They thought it's something about what's happening in the lungs that is helping out. And then downstream, that's just being like, we're seeing an indirect effect of that. But more recently, it has been shown that inhaled nitric oxide does hitch a ride on the hemoglobin, through a reversible bond, which I'm going to tell you what it is, but without noting too much about it. It's called SNO-HB. So it's S nitric oxide. I forget what the S stands for. And it's riding on the hemoglobin, which is the -HB. And so there's a couple papers there's one paper in the Proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences. This was in 2015 that talks really deeply about this SNO-HB. And then there was a more recent paper, I want to say 2019 or maybe a little bit even newer than that, that showed this, what I'm talking about, that when they inhaled it, it increased this SNO-HB and therefore is showing the systemic effect. Like this is how it actually is getting taken up and it is being carried around your body. There's lots of we could just nerd out on what that means and if it's even applicable to nasal breathing, because they were inhaling a lot of extra nitric oxide. So I'm not sure, we don't know if nasal breathing is kind of doing a little bit of that and it's just not enough to notice it in measurements. That would be my guess if I was to, put a wager on it, that every time we breathe through our nose, we are getting a little bit of this SNO-HB. Or a little bit of it is being converted to this SNO-HB, but that is really this version or the storage system of nitric oxide is how it really helps systemically. So when if you had, let's say, low oxygen in your arm, like there was some portion of your arm that had lower oxygen, this SNO-HB is the version of it that can sense that hypoxia. And it can say, oh, we need to reverse back to nitric oxide, back to regular nitric oxide and be released to open up these blood vessels. And it's incredible. It's like, that's like a superpower, right? Of course. I mean, our bodies are incredible, but so that is the version that actually does that. Now, the endothelial, like when it's released systemically, I'm not sure if it gets stored as SNO-HB or if it's just that when it's released, it just automatically opens the blood vessel. So it doesn't need that storage mechanism, I've never gone too far down that rabbit hole, but I do know that like when you hold your breath, nitric oxide concentrations increase significantly. And the thought is that it's an evolutionary adaptation to protect us against periods of low oxygen.
Oh, that's freaking fascinating. I haven't heard that before. So that's very cool. So you've probably seen that, like, it's probably maybe a really misquoted study about humming and 1,500% increase in nasal nitric oxide. So does that mean then, based on that theory, if we hum, then we would be taking them? Because I always thought, well, for humming, based on my old thinking just before this conversation, we would hum, more nitric oxide would come in. I heard about rumours of doctors humming while they were during COVID, sterilising the air, the ones that understood it. And so I was thinking, okay, you hum, you get more nasal nitric oxide. Okay, it probably opens up the lungs a little bit more. There's more, but then it's gone. But based on that makes a lot more sense. You increase the nasal nitric oxide through humming. and then it goes around the body. Now, again, I know this isn't your area of expertise, but I'll just get your thoughts on this. Is that so? It's sticking to the hemoglobin. Is it then just waiting for the time it's needed, or do you think it's
exactly? Yeah.
So cool.
So this was fascinating with this study that showed that it stuck to the hemoglobin. That's a good way. Like, let's just call it sticking to the hemoglobin rather than this, the SNH, SNO, sticky nitric oxide. Basically, it was very selective. So if the region, let me not misquote. Let me remember here. So essentially, if there was no issues with blood flow, it was basically, it didn't matter. But if there was an issue with blood flow, it would selectively help that region. So it has some sensing mechanism, or the hemoglobin has some sensing mechanism to say, hey, I need to reverse this bond and get rid of this sticky NO, so it can help with blood flow in this region. Now, if humming is that's a fascinating thought. Like, so if we hum, maybe we potentially are getting more sticking to our hemoglobin, and then this is going to help downstream. Perhaps, again, you have to be careful when you talk about scientific studies, but the idea with the humming, is the sterilization too. I didn't even mention that. We didn't talk about that with the nitric oxide. Like, it helps with blood flow, but it's also like antimicrobial, antiviral. And so it really could be beneficial with just killing the virus or viruses in general. So that's one reason to hum. If you feel like, I mean, again, you never know what's going on. But I remember when COVID was starting and I'd have to go to the grocery store, I'd be humming the whole time. Like, I had no clue if it was working.
Yeah,
I probably didn't. But in any case, it gives you something to feel good about, at least.
Yeah. It's a fun thing to do, isn't it? I really love a good hum. I want to talk about beetroot in a second, but I was just going to ask you one. Before